My mom and brother sold my game collection, used my money to pay their bills, and threw me out in winter. Hey everyone. I'm in a rough spot right now, and I'm feeling pretty lost. So I figured I'd post here to see if anyone has some advice or perspective. For a bit of background, I'm 25 and still living with my parents and my younger brother, Noah. We've been crammed into this tiny, cluttered house for as long as I can remember. It's home, but it's far from comfortable. I don't mind helping out, but lately, it feels like I'm the one holding everything together. My parents are in their mid-50s, and I've had to step up in ways that just don't seem fair, especially for someone my age. Growing up, my mom had this habit of comparing me to everyone else, always pointing out how my friends were doing better or how I didn't measure up. I never really felt like her daughter, more like some extra help around the house. As for my dad, he's not in great shape. He's got some serious back problems from years of construction work, and while he's a decent guy, he's never been there for me in the ways I really need, emotionally or physically. Then there's Noah. He's 21 and he does whatever he wants, whenever he wants. He's always been the favorite, the golden child. No matter what I do, it never seems to compare to him. He doesn't lift a finger to help, and I'm constantly picking up after him. My mom absolutely dotes on him, always finding excuses for his behavior. He's out almost every night, wasting money on drinks and video games, while I'm the one scrambling to cover the bills because my parents just can't. I've even had to pick up a second job to keep us from drowning financially, but no one seems to notice. What hurts the most is that despite everything I do, my mom is constantly on my case. If I'm a bit late getting home from work, she'll make these passive-aggressive comments about how I don't care about the family. If I buy something for myself, even if it's just groceries or some clothes I actually need, she acts like I'm being wasteful, like every dollar should go to the household. Meanwhile, Noah can vanish for days without a word, and she doesn't say a thing. It's like there's this huge double standard, and it's wearing me down. And lately, it's only gotten worse. We had some serious water damage in the house, and my parents expected me to pay for the repairs. This wasn't some small fix either, it was over $5,000. I'd saved up a bit, but not nearly enough to cover the whole thing, so I had to dip into my emergency fund. That money was supposed to be for my future, not to bail them out because they didn't plan ahead. I tried to talk to my mom about how unfair it was that I'm the only one covering this, but she just brushed me off and said, "What else are you going to do with your money? You live here, don't you?" That hit me harder than I expected, and I had to take a walk just to cool off. I was this close to losing it. As if that wasn't bad enough, last night I overheard something that broke me. I was upstairs, and my mom and Noah were downstairs in the kitchen. The walls here are thin, so I could hear them clearly. My mom was telling Noah that I should feel lucky to still be living here, and that I should be more grateful. She went on, saying things that made me feel even smaller. She even said I'd never find a man if I kept being so selfish. Can you imagine? After everything I've done for them, I'm the selfish one. I was too stunned to confront them right then. I had no idea what to say. I've always been the kind of person who tries to avoid conflict, always trying to keep the peace, but I don't think I can keep doing that. I feel so angry and betrayed. And Noah? He just laughed it off and said, "She'll get over it. She always does, like I'm some kind of doormat they can walk all over without a second thought." I barely slept that night, just lying awake, turning everything over in my mind. I kept thinking about how unfair it all is. I've given so much, and it's like none of it even matters. This morning, when I finally dragged myself downstairs, my mom acted like nothing had happened. She didn't bring up what I overheard, didn't apologize, nothing. Instead, she asked me if I could grab some groceries on my way back from work. It's like I'm stuck in this endless cycle where I'm being used, and nobody even acknowledges it. Meanwhile, my friends are moving forward, starting careers, relationships, building their own lives, and I'm still here, trapped under the same roof, handling everyone else's mess. Part of me wants to pack my things and leave, just walk away and let them fend for themselves. But then there's this crushing guilt that makes it impossible. What kind of daughter leaves her family when they're struggling? What if they can't handle it without me? My dad's health is only getting worse, and I know they'll have a hard time if I'm not around. But at the same time, staying here feels like I'm throwing away any chance I have at my own future. And then there's Noah. He's more than capable of stepping up, but he just won't. He doesn't care, and my mom will never ask him to help. I'm exhausted, being the only one who actually seems to give a damn. I feel trapped, like no matter what choice I make, I'm going to be the villain in someone's story. So that's where I'm at. I'm on the edge and I don't know what to do. Should I confront them again? Should I just leave? Or do I need to accept that this is my life? It's so hard because, despite everything, I do love them. But living like this is breaking me. Has anyone else been in a situation like this? How do you get past the guilt when you want to leave your family behind? Would I be wrong to just walk away? After I made my post, things went downhill fast. I finally confronted my mom about what I heard, hoping, just hoping, she might acknowledge how much I've been sacrificing for the family. But instead, she doubled down. She told me it was my duty as her daughter to help out. I lost it. I told her how unfair it was, how Noah does absolutely nothing yet gets treated like royalty, while I'm practically invisible. She didn't take it well at all. She accused me of being jealous of Noah, of all people, the guy who hasn't lifted a finger to help in years. We ended up arguing for hours, and it just went in circles. It all ended with my mom telling me that if I didn't like living there, I was free to leave. Felt like a switch flipped in my mind. I suddenly had no desire to argue anymore, and I no longer wanted to fight for her approval or affection. I packed a bag, even though I didn't have enough savings to rent my own place yet. I knew I couldn't stay in that house another second. I called my best friend, Emma, and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She immediately said yes without asking any questions. As I was leaving, my dad came out of his room and asked me what was happening. When I explained everything, he didn't try to stop me. He barely said a word, but he gave me this sad look and told me, "You've done more than enough." It was the first time I felt like he truly understood what I had been going through all these years. My brother Noah, however, didn't say anything. He just watched me walk out the door, completely indifferent. Now, I'm staying with Emma, trying to figure out what my next steps will be. I feel a strange mix of freedom and guilt, like I've abandoned my family when they needed me the most, even though I know that's not really the case. It was supposed to be just a regular day like any other. In fact, I almost forgot it was my birthday. I had turned 28, which isn't exactly a big milestone, but it was still a reminder that time was passing, and I wasn't getting any younger. I had been so wrapped up in work and paying bills that celebrating felt pointless. Yet, I still had a small hope that my family would remember. Even just a simple happy birthday would have been enough. The workday was exhausting. My job at the small accounting firm was anything but glamorous, and the hours were long. I liked the predictability of numbers because they don't lie or change their minds based on emotions. By the time the clock hit 5 p.m., I just wanted to get home, take a hot shower, and crawl into bed. I wasn't expecting a party, but I was hoping for a bit of peace. When I pulled into the driveway, I immediately sensed that something was wrong. There was a pile of stuff on the lawn, scattered like the aftermath of a chaotic yard sale. My heart sank when I realized it was my belongings. My clothes, books, and even framed photos from my room were carelessly thrown outside. Shoes, bags, and even my laptop bag were lying in the dirt like garbage. I sat frozen in my car for a moment, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My hands were shaking as I opened the car door and stepped out, the cold evening air hitting me like a slap. My mom was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, her face a mixture of annoyance and indifference. "What the hell is going on?" I yelled, my voice cracking with emotion. She didn't even flinch and said, "It's time for you to grow up, Danielle," with no hint of concern or sympathy. My mom looked straight at me, using my old nickname like she used to, and said, "You've been a burden long enough. We can't afford to carry you anymore." Felt like a punch to the stomach. My eyes darted to Noah, who was lounging in the doorway with a casual smirk. He looked like he was enjoying the whole thing. "You're throwing me out on my birthday?" I asked, my voice sounding distant, like it belonged to someone else. "This isn't about your birthday," my mom snapped, rolling her eyes in exasperation. "It's about the fact that you're almost 30 and still living here. We've done enough for you. It's time for you to figure things out on your own. I stood there, stunned, barely able to believe what I was hearing. After everything I had done, paying bills, covering repairs, giving up my own dreams to support them, they were tossing me out like I was nothing. My chest felt tight as I fought to keep the tears at bay. "Mom, I've been helping you," I said, my voice breaking. "I've been the one paying the bills." "Not enough," she cut in, her tone sharp. "Not enough for what we need. You've overstayed your welcome. You're an adult, go live like one." I turned to Noah, silently pleading for him to say something, to defend me even a little. But he just shrugged, as if it was no big deal. He had always been her favorite, and now I saw just how deeply that favoritism ran. He had moved into my old room the moment I got my first job, living off the money I brought in while he did nothing but play games all day. I took a step closer, my voice rising in frustration. "You're really okay with this? Throwing me out like I'm some kind of parasite?" Noah glanced at Mom and then back at me, completely unfazed. "Maybe it's time you stopped blaming us for your problems," he said with a careless shrug. I felt fury boiling inside me. For years I had kept my head down, done everything that was asked of me, and put my family first. And this was how they repaid me. My stomach churned, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick right there in the driveway. "I can't believe this," I muttered, my head shaking in disbelief. "I've given up everything for you. Stop playing the victim." "Danielle," my mom said coldly, her eyes hard, "we never asked you to give up anything. You stayed here because you wanted to. It's not our fault you didn't make anything of your life." Her words hit me like a slap across the face. Everything I had done, all those years of sacrifice, were brushed aside as if they meant nothing. I had spent so long trying to make them proud, to be someone they could respect. But it was obvious now that nothing I did would ever be enough. I could feel tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not while they were standing there, waiting for me to crumble. Without a word, I turned away from them, feeling the weight of every unspoken hurt and every disappointment pressing down on my shoulders. I walked toward the pile of my belongings, my hands shaking as I started to gather what I could. I stuffed clothes and personal items into a bag, and I heard Noah laugh softly behind me, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite hear. It didn't matter anymore. I was done with him, done with my mom, and done with all of it. I felt the anger rising inside me, but I forced it down and focused on picking up my things from the lawn. As I loaded the last of my belongings into the trunk of my car, my mom stepped closer. She told me, "We'll give you a few days to get the rest of your stuff, but don't take too long. We need the space." Her words stung, and I stared at her, speechless. All these years, I had believed I was part of the family, but now I realized I was just someone taking up space in their lives. Without saying another word, I got into my car and slammed the door shut. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I pulled out of the driveway without looking back, because I knew that if I did, I might break down and lose control. I drove aimlessly for a while, unsure of where to go or what to do next. Panic rose in my chest as I thought about my limited savings, which were not enough to afford a place on my own right away. I wondered if I would have to sleep in my car or crash at a friend's house. My thoughts raced, and my heart pounded as I tried to think clearly. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store and parked. I sat there for a while, struggling to calm myself down, but it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I checked my phone and saw that there were no messages or missed calls. It was my birthday, and nobody cared enough to reach out. I scrolled through my contacts, feeling a deep sense of loneliness. Most of my friends had moved on with their own lives, and I didn't have anyone I felt comfortable turning to. My job paid just enough to cover my bills, but not enough to handle a crisis like this. Returning to my family was no longer an option. In desperation, I texted Emma. She was the only person who truly understood what I had been dealing with at home. I told her what had happened, half expecting her to be too busy to respond. Within minutes, she texted back and told me to come over and stay as long as I needed. Relief washed over me, even though I felt a surge of guilt. I didn't want to be a burden on her, but I had no other choice. I drove to Emma's house with my mind still spinning. When I arrived, she met me at the door and hugged me tightly. I hadn't realized how much I needed that hug until I was in her arms. We sat down on her couch, and for the first time that day, I let the tears fall. I told her everything. How my mom had kicked me out, how Noah had just watched without a word, and how lost I felt. Emma listened patiently, without interrupting, just letting me pour out everything I had been holding inside. When I finally finished, she looked me directly in the eyes and said, "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Emma looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're better off without them, Danny. You've done more than anyone should ever have to. It's time to start thinking about yourself." Her words hit me hard, because deep down, I knew she was right. I had spent so many years trying to make my family happy, always being the good daughter, the responsible one, but no matter how much I did, it was never enough. Maybe it was finally time to focus on myself. We talked for hours that night, and by the time I finally fell asleep, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. The panic was still there, but it was softer now, like a background noise instead of a deafening roar. I wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The next few days blurred together. I called my job and explained the situation, and luckily, my boss was understanding. Emma was a huge help, and she jumped right in, helping me look for apartments. I began to realize that maybe this was my chance to start over. It wasn't going to be easy, and I had no idea how things would turn out, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over my own life. I didn't reach out to my mom or Noah after that night. I figured if they wanted to contact me, they would. But they never did, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. It hurt, but it also confirmed what I had been trying to ignore for so long. They never really cared. As I started to piece my life back together, I realized this was the moment I had been waiting for. Even if it didn't look the way I had imagined. I was finally on my own, and while it was terrifying, it was also liberating. 2 weeks had passed since I left my mom's house, and I was still struggling to make sense of everything that had happened. I never imagined I'd end up like this, living out of a suitcase, barely scraping by in a rundown motel. The room was cramped, just big enough for a small bed, a worn-out desk, and an old TV that flickered more than it worked. It smelled like mildew and stale cigarettes, but it was all I could afford for now. I hadn't found a new apartment yet. Between my job and the emotional roller coaster I was riding, I just didn't have the energy to keep up with apartment hunting. The few places I had visited were either way out of my price range or in neighborhoods that made me feel uneasy. Every time I opened my laptop to scroll through rental listings, a wave of anxiety hit me. I wasn't sure how long I could keep this up. The motel was cheap, but I was quickly burning through what little savings I had managed to hold on to. Each day, the reality of my situation hit a little harder. I was truly on my own. No safety net, no family waiting in the wings. It was just me, and I knew no one was going to come and save me. I tried to stay strong, reminding myself that I'd been through tougher times. But there were nights when the loneliness crept in, and the sound of the buzzing neon sign outside my window mixed with the constant hum of traffic kept me awake, making the darkness feel heavier. I knew that living in that dingy motel was not an option, and Daniel's offer seemed like the only way out. I took a deep breath and said, "I really appreciate the offer, Daniel. Let me think about it for a bit." He smiled and said, "Of course, take all the time you need. The offer is there if you want it." For the rest of the day, his words echoed in my mind. My life felt like it was spiraling out of control, and my family still hadn't contacted me since I left. I had not reached out to them either, and it was clear that our relationship was over. Even though I knew it was the best choice, the finality of it hit me harder than I expected. The only thing that kept me going was my job. The accounting firm wasn't glamorous, but it was consistent, and that stability was the one thing holding me together. I managed to get through each day by burying myself in spreadsheets and numbers, keeping my mind distracted from everything else in my life. One afternoon at the office, I was absorbed in my work when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked up and saw Daniel standing there. We weren't close, but he had always been friendly. He was tall, with dark hair and kind eyes, and he seemed to stay calm even when the office was chaotic. "Hey, Danielle," he said. giving me a hesitant smile. Do you have a minute? I closed my laptop and nodded. Sure. What's up? He shifted uncomfortably, as if searching for the right words. I overheard you talking to Emma the other day, he said, glancing around to make sure nobody else was listening. About your living situation. Embarrassment washed over me, and I felt a lump in my throat. I hadn't realized anyone else had overheard me confide in Emma about staying in a motel and my difficulties finding a new place. Yeah, I said cautiously. It's been a rough couple of weeks. Daniel nodded, his expression full of concern. I understand. I don't want to pry, but I have a guest room at my place. It's just sitting empty, and if you need a place to stay, you're welcome to use it for as long as you need. I blinked in shock, completely taken aback. Are you serious? Yes, I am, he said with sincerity. There are no strings attached. I know how tough it can be to find a place around here, especially on short notice. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. On one hand, his offer felt like a way out of the awful motel and a step toward stability. On the other hand, I barely knew him outside of work. I wasn't sure how comfortable I felt accepting his help. Noticing my uncertainty, Daniel raised his hands and said, I understand that it's a big decision. There's no pressure at all. I just wanted you to know that the option is there. I sat there weighing my choices. The truth was that my options were limited. My savings were quickly running out, and I couldn't afford the motel much longer. Moving into Daniel's guest room, even temporarily, seemed like the only chance I had to regain some stability. I realized that if I didn't take a chance, I might end up in a much worse situation. Okay, I said finally, trying to sound confident. I'll accept your offer, at least for a little while. I need to get out of that motel. Daniel's face lit up with relief, and he nodded in understanding. I'm glad you're willing to give it a try. You can come by whenever you're ready. We'll figure everything out together. The idea of living in my car had crossed my mind, but I knew I needed to find a better solution. So, when I finally looked Daniel in the eye and said, okay, I'll take you up on that offer, I felt both desperation and determination. Daniel's face lit up with relief. Great. You can move in whenever you're ready, he said, almost too enthusiastically. I nodded, swallowing my pride, knowing this was my only chance to get out of the motel. That night, I packed my things, threw them into my car, and drove to Daniel's apartment. His place was simple but clean. A 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, a far cry from the dingy motel room I had called home. As soon as I arrived, he helped me bring in my bags, showing me to the guest room. It had a small bed, a dresser, and a window that let in warm light. After weeks of feeling trapped, this room felt like a sanctuary. I hope you're comfortable here, Daniel said, standing in the doorway. His voice was warm, and he seemed genuinely eager to help. It's perfect, I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you for this. I don't know what I would have done without your help. The first few days were peaceful. Daniel kept to himself, mostly staying in his room or hanging out with friends. I was grateful for the privacy, feeling a sense of safety I hadn't felt in weeks. But soon, things started to change and the atmosphere shifted. It began with him spending more time in the common areas whenever I was there. He lingered in the kitchen when I cooked, watching me a little too closely, his casual comments becoming more personal. One evening, as I was making dinner, he leaned against the counter and said, You know, it's kind of nice having a woman around here. The place feels less empty. His eyes didn't leave me, and I forced a smile, brushing off the discomfort that twisted in my gut. As the days went on, he started knocking on my door late at night, asking if I wanted to watch a movie. I would decline, explaining that I needed sleep, but he never seemed to take the hint. His knocks became more frequent, his presence heavier, and my sense of unease grew. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, he turned to me and said, You don't have to rush to leave, you know. I kind of like having you here. His tone was soft, too soft, and his gaze lingered far longer than it should have. I felt a chill settle over me, but I kept my voice steady. I appreciate that, I said, but I'm just waiting to hear back on a few apartments. I should be out of your way soon. Daniel's expression didn't change. He seemed to ignore my words, leaning a little closer. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," he said, his eyes not moving away from mine. Panic surged in my chest. I made a quick excuse about needing to get up early and retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. I sat on my bed, my heart racing, feeling trapped. Was I reading too much into this? Was I overreacting? But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The tension escalated over the next few days. Daniel's late-night knocks on my door became more insistent, his tone less casual. He would stand in the hallway, lingering, waiting for me to change my mind. His gaze felt heavier, his voice quieter, and my sense of safety evaporated. One night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard footsteps outside my door. My heart pounded as the sound grew louder, stopping just outside. The doorknob rattled slightly, and I froze, barely breathing. I knew then that I couldn't stay any longer. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Something was very, very wrong. I waited until I heard him walk away, my entire body tense and alert. As soon as I felt safe enough, I made a decision. I needed to get out, and I needed to do it now. My instincts were screaming, and I wasn't going to ignore them any longer. The gut feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. So the next morning I left for work early, desperate to avoid another uncomfortable run-in with Daniel. I knew I had to find a new place to live, and I had to find it fast. But my apartment search was going nowhere. Every option was either too expensive or in a neighborhood I wouldn't feel safe in. With each passing day, the idea of staying in Daniel's apartment made my skin crawl. Things finally boiled over one night when I came home late from work. I had deliberately stayed at the office longer, hoping that if I got home late enough, I might avoid Daniel altogether. But as soon as I walked through the door, I saw him sitting on the couch, staring at me. "Hey," he said, his voice too cheerful, sending a shiver down my spine. I made dinner. I glanced over at the dining table and saw 2 plates of spaghetti, still steaming. My stomach twisted. I had never asked him to make dinner, and the idea of sitting down to eat with him made my chest tighten. I forced myself to stay calm and said, "I'm not really hungry. I think I'll just go to bed." Daniel's smile vanished, and his eyes darkened. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice dropping to a cold, accusatory tone. I froze, my hand halfway to my bedroom door. "What? No, I've just been busy with work," I said, struggling to sound casual. "Don't lie to me, Danielle," he snapped, rising from the couch. His whole demeanor had shifted, and the anger simmering in his voice made my heart race. "I've been nothing but nice to you. I let you stay here for free, and this is how you repay me." A wave of panic surged through me. I had never seen him this angry before, and I instinctively backed away, my hands slipping into my pocket to grab my phone. "I'm sorry," I stammered, trying to calm him down. "I didn't mean to." "To what? To take advantage of me?" Daniel interrupted, stepping closer. "To use me?" I swallowed hard, my mind racing for a way out. "Daniel, I think it's best if I find somewhere else to stay," I said as calmly as I could manage. "I'll start looking tomorrow." His face twisted with fury, his voice turning ice cold. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed. Without thinking, I turned and bolted for my room, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the lock, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Outside, I could hear him pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath. My whole body trembled, and I pressed my back against the door, too scared to move. Finally, after what felt like hours, his footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening, and then heard the front door slam shut. I waited several more minutes, just to be sure he was really gone, before I moved. I grabbed my things as quickly as I could, my heart pounding, and headed for the door. I couldn't stay there another night. I had to get out. Something changed in me after that night. Severing ties with my family had been hard, but it felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. Now, after everything with Daniel, I realized I had no one else to rely on but myself. For the first time, I was truly free to focus on my own needs, without the crushing burden of anyone else's expectations. I was scared, but I was determined not to let anyone trap me ever again. The pressure of her job at the design firm had always been intense, but now she had a new motivation driving her forward. Danielle was determined to build a life that was entirely her own. She began taking on more projects, no matter how complex or time-consuming. She wanted to prove to herself and to everyone else that she could succeed independently. Late nights at the office became her routine. She did not just complete her assignments. She went above and beyond, securing new clients and crafting innovative campaigns. Slowly, her dedication started to pay off, and she began gaining recognition within the company. Her boss, Melanie, a strict but fair woman in her mid-40s, noticed Danielle's hard work and increased her responsibilities. Danielle faced every challenge with determination, rarely stopping to catch her breath. Before long, she became the go-to person for major projects, and her input became essential to her team's success. One afternoon, Melanie called Danielle into her office. Danielle felt her stomach tighten with nerves, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I wanted to talk to you about all the hard work you've been doing," Melanie said. "It hasn't gone unnoticed, not just by me but by the higher-ups as well." Danielle's heart pounded as Melanie paused, then smiled. "We want to promote you to lead designer. You've earned it." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Danielle could hardly believe what she was hearing. Lead designer. All the late nights, sacrifices, and exhaustion had finally paid off. She could barely contain her excitement as she thanked Melanie, who handed her the official offer letter. "I knew you had it in you," Melanie said with a nod of approval. The promotion did not just come with a new title and more responsibilities. It included a raise. The increase in pay was enough for Danielle to move out of her temporary situation and finally find a place she could truly call her own. Felt like everything was falling into place. Her hard work was finally paying off, and, for the first time, her future looked bright. Danielle found a beautiful new apartment with large windows and an open floor plan. It was a space that belonged entirely to her, free from the weight of her family's expectations. She filled it with sleek, modern furniture, artwork she loved, and soft blankets that made it feel like a sanctuary. Every time she walked through the door, she felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. However, the peace did not last. After months of silence, her phone buzzed one evening with a familiar name flashing on the screen. Noah. Danielle stared at it for a moment, her thumb hovering over the decline button. She had not spoken to him or anyone in her family since they had forced her out. The idea of reconnecting made her feel uneasy, but curiosity began to gnaw at her. Curiosity and a deep sense of unease took over, and Danielle answered the call. "Hey," she said, her voice tense, unsure of what was coming. "It's Mom and Dad," Noah said, his tone strained and hesitant. "They're in serious financial trouble. They asked me to reach out to you." Danielle's heart sank. It was always about money. They had not called out of concern or to make amends. They needed her. She could almost hear her mother in the background, instructing Noah on exactly what to say, just like she had done so many times before. "They really need help," Noah said, his voice cracking. "Things have been really bad." Danielle felt the familiar rage rising inside her. She thought of all the times she had sacrificed for them, only to be cast aside when she needed them most. Now they had the nerve to come back asking for more. Her voice was cold and firm. "I'm sorry, Noah, but I can't help them. I won't." There was a heavy silence. "Danielle, don't be like this," Noah said, irritation creeping into his voice. "It's not like you can't afford it now. You got that big promotion. You owe it to them." Danielle's anger exploded. "I owe them," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "After they threw me out onto the street? After they told me I was nothing but a burden? No, Noah, I don't owe them a damn thing." Noah let out a frustrated sigh, but he didn't push any further. They exchanged a tense goodbye, and Danielle ended the call, her hands shaking. A mix of rage and triumph surged through her. She had drawn the line at last. She was no longer their puppet, no longer the daughter who could be guilted and manipulated. Weeks passed, and she threw herself into work, feeling a new sense of freedom she had never known before. But then, one night, as she sat in her apartment unwinding after a grueling day, there was a loud, insistent knock at the door. Her heart lurched. She wasn't expecting anyone, and she cautiously looked through the peephole. Her blood went cold. Her parents and Noah stood outside, expressions grim and determined. Danielle opened the door slowly, her pulse racing. Her mother's smile was wide and unnerving, lacking any genuine warmth. "Danielle," her mother said sweetly, stepping forward as if she owned the place. "We need to talk." Danielle held her ground, refusing to let them step inside. "What are you doing here?" she asked, barely able to keep her voice steady. Her father stood behind her mother, his face stony and hostile, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Noah looked uncomfortable, shifting from one foot to the other, avoiding her gaze. "We thought," her mother said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "that since you're doing so well now, it would be a perfect time to reunite. After all, we were the ones who pushed you to be successful." Danielle's jaw dropped, rage building with each word. "You think you deserve credit for my success?" she hissed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You threw me out of the house. You told me I was worthless, and now you show up here, pretending you had anything to do with what I've achieved." Her mother's fake smile faltered, but she pushed on, refusing to back down. "It's true, Danielle. You wouldn't be where you are today if we hadn't given you that motivation." Danielle felt like she had been slapped. The fury inside her burned white-hot, and she stepped closer, her voice rising. "The only thing you ever motivated me to do was to get away from you," she shouted. "I succeeded despite everything you put me through, not because of it." Her father's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, his voice cold and firm. "We were only doing what was best for you. We did what we had to do." Danielle's fury turned to ice, her face hardening. "What was best for me?" she asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Throwing me out, calling me a burden, expecting me to sacrifice everything for you while you gave nothing in return. That was what you thought was best?" Noah finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Danielle, we just want to make things right. Can't we put the past behind us?" Danielle's eyes flashed with anger as she glared at him. "No, Noah," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I gave everything I had, and you all left me with nothing. I built this life on my own, without any of you, and I will not let you take credit for it." She felt her chest tightening, but she refused to back down. Her mother's eyes widened, shock and fury battling on her face. Her father's expression remained stone cold, and Noah looked like he wished he were anywhere else. Danielle took a deep breath and spoke with finality. "Leave. You are not welcome here. I am done with all of you." Her mother opened her mouth to argue, but Danielle didn't let her. "No," she said, her voice strong and unyielding. "Get out. Now." There was a heavy silence, and for a moment, nobody moved. Her parents finally turned and walked away, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief. Noah lingered for a second longer, his face full of regret, but he said nothing and followed them down the hallway. Danielle shut the door firmly behind them, her heart thudding in her chest. She locked it, took a deep breath, and let the wave of emotion crash over her. She had stood up for herself, and she had not backed down. For the first time, she felt truly free. Her mother's smile twisted with anger. "Danielle, we are your family. You can't just shut us out like this." Danielle's hands shook with rage as she stared them down. "You are not my family anymore. Now get out," she said with finality. Her father stepped forward, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. "You think you can just throw us out? You think you can take what belongs to us and walk away?" Danielle's glare didn't waver. "What's yours? This is my life and my home. You are not welcome here." Her father's face turned bright red with fury. "We will see about that," he hissed before turning to leave. They slammed the door behind them, but Danielle felt certain that this was not the end. She had a sinking feeling that they would try something else. A few days later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from a lawyer representing her parents, claiming that they had a right to her property because they had supported her for so many years. They were threatening to take her to court to claim a portion of what she had built. Danielle's stomach churned, and she felt a wave of nausea. She couldn't believe they were doing this to her, even now, after everything they had put her through. She didn't waste a moment and immediately called her friend Alex, who was a lawyer. They had gone to college together, and although they had not stayed close, she knew he would be willing to help. When Alex heard the situation, he was furious. "They don't have a leg to stand on, Danielle," he assured her. "You are going to be fine. We will fight this." Alex helped Danielle draft a strong response, and soon she found herself in a legal battle with her own parents. It was emotionally exhausting, but Danielle knew she had to stay firm. She would not let them manipulate or intimidate her ever again. During this time, her family did everything they could to make her look like the villain. They spread lies, telling anyone who would listen that Danielle was ungrateful and had abandoned them when they needed her most. Danielle refused to engage in their drama. She kept her focus on her work, her life, and moving forward. She poured her energy into the legal battle, determined to protect what she had worked so hard to achieve. Finally, after weeks of anxiety and stress, the court ruled in her favor. Not only was her parents' case dismissed, but the judge granted Danielle a restraining order against them. They were no longer allowed to come near her or contact her in any way. The victory was a relief, but it was also a painful ending. Danielle had always hoped that her family might change, that they might realize the harm they had done and seek a real reconciliation. Now, she understood that it would never happen. Holding the court order in her hands, she felt a mix of triumph and sorrow, knowing that this was the end of any hope she had once had for a different kind of family. Danielle had always hoped that her family would change, that they would finally see her for who she was and appreciate everything she had done for them. However, that day never came. They were too consumed by their own selfishness to ever change. In the months that followed, Danielle discovered that her parents' financial troubles were far worse than she had initially understood. They had been hiding income from taxes for years, and their debts had spiraled out of control. Eventually, their situation caught up with them, and they faced serious legal consequences. When Danielle heard the news, she felt a sense of closure. She had spent years trying to save them, trying to fix their problems, but now she understood that it was never her job to rescue them. Her parents had made their choices, and now they were facing the consequences on their own. For the first time in her life, Danielle felt truly free from their manipulation and control. She could finally live her life on her own terms, without the weight of their expectations dragging her down. She dedicated herself to her career, building something she could be proud of. For the first time, she allowed herself to think about her own happiness and what she wanted, rather than what others expected of her. It was not an easy journey, but it was hers, and that was all that mattered.